Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of New Beginnings with me, Fatima Asmal. We're coming to you once again from the Lifestyle Center at the Antique Cafe in Durban. Over the past 9 weeks, we've heard stories of various women as well as one gentleman who converted to Islam, and their stories have inspired us and benefited us in so many other ways. Today, we are joined by our second male guest, Alhamdulillah, and he's going to tell us how it is that he became a Muslim. So I welcome to the show Jared Baker. Assalamu alaikum, Jared.
Salam.
Okay, let's start by asking you, who is Jared Baker? How old is he? What does he do? Tell us more about him.
25. Studied law, UKZN. I'm an advocate now. Yeah.
And when did you convert to Islam?
2017.
It's going to be 3 years this year,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Okay, Jared, usually we start by asking someone what their first introduction to religion was. So can you tell me about your first introduction to religion? Did you come from a religious family? What religion were they practicing? And were you practicing on this religion as well?
Came from a Christian background. We weren't very, very practicing, but we went to church on Sundays. I went to youth programs on Fridays, etc. while I was younger. And other than that, my exposure to religion was also through schools, etc. Were very colonial schooling system, whatnot. So basically, from a Protestant point of view, it was purely that. Originally, my family had a Catholic upbringing, but they had converted well before I was born to Protestant.
So what sparked the interest in Islam then?
For me, it was essentially many years in the making. I had, from a very young age, already started picking up inconsistencies that I felt existed within the religion that I was following, having asked questions, etc. Normally when those questions were asked, they weren't too pleased with it. I won't go into detail on those specific issues at point, but essentially for me, what I found was when I was around 8 or 9, at Sunday school, I had asked specific questions, regarding a specific tenet of my faith. I had always believed in God. I had always believed in Jesus. I had always believed in the prophets before him. And essentially for me, I just could not at all fathom that Jesus can exist as both a son and a God, etc. So when I'd asked those questions, I was obviously briefly dismissed, etc. When I was a teenager, 13, 14, with a lot of the elders that I did speak to about it, they instead of answering the question, they cautioned me against asking such questions because I may lose my faith. For me, I always felt strong in my faith. From day one, I always believed in God. I was very, very strong in my faith. And the reason why those questions were so important to me was because I wanted to do things the right way. So from there, university, whatnot, I wasn't so much practicing, etc. There was a disconnect between me and not my faith so much. I just did not know, where I stood in terms of my religious views.
Did you speak to your parents about it?
I spoke to my father about it when I was a young teenager, etc. And like I said, he was, and I understand why. He was more of the view that, don't really ask questions like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you end up researching Islam then?
I'm guessing towards the latter half of my university years.
You mentioned there was, when we were researching,
Yeah.
when we were preparing for the show, you mentioned there was something to do with the rabbi that happened.
Yeah. So towards the latter half of university, those questions started coming up again. It's where you start really fine-tuning the person you really are and whatnot. And again, I wasn't satisfied at all with where I stood. I wanted to start practicing my religion, etc. But I needed to know, who am I? What do I believe in, etc. And I was watching, while doing my research, etc. I had come across a rabbi that was talking about how Jesus is not God. He's a prophet, sure, but he's not God. And that was the first time on a religious level, somebody else, I resonated with the exact same thing. And from there, I mean, I said, okay, perhaps I'm Jewish. And I did my research, read the Torah. I did a lot of research into it. And I still wasn't particularly satisfied with where I was going. I read up, on Catholicism, etc. Still not particularly satisfied. So it was years and years of self-research. I wasn't really consulting with anybody. I wasn't exactly doing anything. And at this point, I still never looked toward Islam, probably because of my own, my own fears that come with.
What fears?
Well, it's no secret that, being a Muslim in this world essentially isn't exactly all roses and whatnot. It's not easy. It comes with prejudicial views. It comes with a lot of preconceived notions at a macro and micro level in terms of social structures. So essentially for me, it was something that I guess subconsciously I was shying away from, etc. And even when I started moving towards researching Islam, I still had not read the Quran. I was looking more at the comparative religion side of it. I was more like looking for an excuse not to be Muslim.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that point,
So what did your research of Islam consist of initially, if not reading the Quran?
Just internet research. I was looking, I think there was like Islam City, a lot of chat rooms, those types of things, Reddit. I was looking at a more objective basis of it all. And one thing I did keep on noticing is, you must remember when you're kind of looking, but you're not looking with an objective view. You start being pulled towards the actual objective view of it. And when all these questions that are asked, when you research them, you see those questions asked within a Christian context or within a Judeo context, it's blatantly biased, in terms of the way it is. So I understand why. It's someone's belief system. But when those questions were asked in terms of Islam as a legal scholar, it resonated with me because what I started finding that Islam swayed very more towards its law, essentially. It's an actual legal framework, an actual code to live by. So when those questions are answered, when you look at like people giving their fatwas and whatnot, they put out their rule of law first and they apply it to our modern day life. And that was something I was used to. It's something that naturally resonated to me. And still not being 100% convinced, I think eventually I just ended up opening the Quran and the first page, Surah Fatiha. By the end of the first page, okay, I'm Muslim. I'd opened it basically saying, oh, not too sure. I was actually feeling guilty for opening it. And by second page or whatnot, I was like, okay, I'm reading this as a Muslim now. It was something that I immediately subscribed to. It was something that, for some reason, that first page just calmed any sort of doubt in my head that I had. And it wasn't even with the intention of, okay, I think I'm Muslim. It was more me just reading it.
Okay. So you didn't, what happened next? Did you undergo some kind of a formal process of going to the mosque and taking the Shahada?
I think for me, at that point, I started researching more from a theoretical point of view.
But you told yourself, I am a Muslim.
But I told myself, I knew at that point I'm Muslim, and I hadn't started putting what I learned into practice. You must remember it was very, very solitary at first. It was something I kept to myself, and eventually it got annoying. I felt very, very Muslim, but I wasn't doing things that Muslims are supposed to do, like pray 5 times a day, etc., mainly because I didn't know how. Eventually, I had gotten quite agitated with myself and irritated with myself. One day, I was at a friend's house actually, and I had some alone time. I was sitting in the backyard and I phoned one of who are now my mentors. And I've been close to him. He's kind of watched me grow up over the years and whatnot. I told him, listen, have a very theoretical understanding of Islam. It's
You
something
mean
I believe in.
you mean it was somebody who was Muslim?
Yeah,
Okay, so
Yeah.
now somebody who's senior to you in Muslim.
100%.
Okay.
So, and I told him my issues in terms of I'm struggling to get into the practice of it. You must understand that if you're just reading, it doesn't exactly fold out on a practical level and whatnot. So that same day he picked me up, we went to the masjid, and for the next few weeks after that, we prayed at a minimum 3 to 4 times a day together. He'd introduce me to the brothers at the mosque, and yeah, from there I got into a swing of praying. And done. Once I was in that swing, by this time I started feeling actually Muslim, you know. I was
Okay.
praying, I was and whatnot, and
Okay.
yeah.
Hold that thought, Jared. We're going to take a short ad break. We're speaking to Jared Baker about his conversion to Islam. Very interesting story. We're going to cross over for an ad break now, and when we return, we'll continue, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum for now. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to New Beginnings. We're talking to Jared Baker, and before the break he told us how it is that he became a Muslim. And Jared, you were telling us about a mentor, somebody older than you,
Elder.
who actually took you to the masjid, and you then started to pray. What happened next?
I think at this point what he was made absolutely sure was that he put this kind of veil over me, and he kept me close to him in my very fragile stages of being a Muslim. It was a fear that I had myself, you know, of being bombarded with don't do this and don't do this and don't do this. I understand that some people, it's coming from a good place. They want you to do the right thing, etc. But a lot of the times it's startling, you know, to be just after you pray, somebody, you know, just starts shouting you or whatnot. But essentially, fast forward a few months, I'm at campus, normal day, and I bump into a old friend of mine who I wasn't sure it was because he was in a turban and a kurta and whatnot. He had this nur to him, and we bumped into each other, and I was like, haven't seen a very long time. It was actually years. And he was like, so when you becoming Muslim? And I told him, well, I am Muslim. And he's like, well, okay, that's great. We have a program down in
I
the
must interrupt
Jamaat.
you. I must
Yeah.
interrupt you. You told me, and I think
Yeah.
this story would make a lot more
Yeah.
sense to our viewers. You told me that you knew a lot of Muslims in high school.
No,
correct?
100%. I went to DHS. There's a very, very strong Muslim brotherhood. I mean, there's a strong brotherhood as it is in a high school like that, and there's an even greater Muslim brotherhood there. So the majority, or at least half of my friends, were Muslim and whatnot. And one thing we did in school, we were exposed quite easily to Islamic culture, whatnot. A lot of the non-Muslims would fast with them, for example, during Ramadan, etc. We'd get invited for Eid, we'd go to the MSA Brides and stuff like that. So a lot of people at DHS, or specifically within those circles, weren't strangers to Islam, essentially.
Okay, so coming back to this brother,
Yeah.
was he at DHS with you?
He was at DHS with me.
And now he was all...
Yeah.
Okay.
He had a different yaqeen to him.
Okay.
And
Alhamdulillah.
essentially, yeah, we went down to the program. There was a student Jamaat. Well, they work on students. They're from Joburg. And went for the program, whatnot. And then from there were just a good bunch of lads. We went out for the day, went to the beach, we went eat, went to a few restaurants over that evening. We eat a lot in Jamaat. And then my friend had told me, hey, you want to sleep in the masjid tonight? I'm like, you can do that. He's like, sure, you can. And that night we slept. And by this time I was very, very uninterested in entering the real world again. So I joined them on Jamaat. They went to PMB, they went to Newcastle. So it was like that. Once I had stayed over that night, I went home. I have a go bag. It's always packed because I live like that.
What has the Jamaat done for you as a inverted commas new Muslim?
Well, essentially, it's a very, very loving environment. It's one without judgment, etc. I think they doing good work. For me, it's like a mobile madrasa. Every single moment, every minute that goes past, I'm learning something new. You know, from good akhlaq to, you know, having a good akhlaq, having good adab, etc. A lot of forgotten sunnats. You know, you'll find these things from the way someone's sitting. You know, you look at all of these things, and it starts naturally becoming part of your daily life. And I mean, the best thing is, I mean, it's a good iman booster. You know, you're in an environment of deen. There's a lot of love in it. There's a lot of concern, etc. So for me, I've probably learned in as little as a few months. I probably learned what takes others years, because you're on the road. You're doing it constantly, and you're in that environment where you pick it up faster.
And through the Jamaat, are you working with other young Muslims?
Yeah, specifically, I mean, our groups and whatnot, there's a lot all over South Africa. I think Joburg is just doing really, really, really good work. I think wherever they go, whenever they come, I drop what I'm doing, I move with them. When we go to have programs and whatnot, you see the other Jamaats, they struggle to pull maybe 20, 30. You know, that's a high number for them. We'll have a couple hundred on short notice. We'll arrive there within that next day or two. We're having huge programs. And it's not only that, I think we also understand the struggles the youth are having, etc. We see them walking on the road or whatnot. We'll chill with them, etc. We'll engage. We'll say, let's go play soccer, and then go for a program afterwards. I think we kind of changing the entire thing where, you know, knocking on doors and just talking to you, etc. We're making a much more social thing. We're making, like, deen is fun. Like, I mean, there's nothing hard about it or anything of that sort. So we just kind of immerse them in it, put them in an environment of love, put them in an environment of understanding, and let everything else happen from there.
Okay. Jared, what about your family, if this is something you're comfortable speaking about? When did you tell them, at which stage of your journey did you actually tell them that you were Muslim, and how did they react to it? And who is your family made up of, by the way? So is it a mom, dad?
Okay. So for me, I was taught, I knew from a very early point in my faith, that I can't just jump out and say, okay, I'm Muslim, etc., etc. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted to be in a position where I could adequately, number one, defend myself and adequately speak on behalf of my faith. And I was, in the early days, in no position to speak on behalf of my faith. So when I had reached a sufficient level of knowledge, it just so happened. By this time, I was going on Jamaat a lot. I had just come out of itikaf. By this time, my father just asked me, like, are you Muslim? And I'm like, well, yeah. And he's like, okay, sure.
What made him think that, though?
I think he started picking up, like I said, the adab and whatnot, that started naturally coming with me, etc. You know, looking down, not looking at women in a hurry. So I think he started picking up on those. One half of my family is Muslim and whatnot. So, and he grew up in an environment where Muslims were around, so he picked up on it, and he asked me. I think he wasn't upset about me being Muslim per se. I think it was probably 5 minutes of him saying, you should have told me, so we could accommodate you. They were accommodating. There's only halal meat in the house. We've never eaten pork. Nobody drinks or anything of that sort. So it wasn't a hard adjustment in any event. Yeah.
Your mom, you said, is somebody who studies theology.
Yeah, so my mom has a background in theology, etc., which was quite odd, because while she was finding herself and strengthening her faith, I was doing the same too, but not particularly in her faith. And that was one thing I was particularly concerned of. My mother's always been very loving, etc. But I think for me, I think we were just talking the one day, and I just asked her, I said, so I was testing the waters. And I'm like, so do you think someone who puts their head down on the ground 5 times a day and asks for forgiveness is going to hell? Someone who believes in the same God as you, someone who also believes in Jesus, etc. Do you honestly, in your heart, believe they would go to hell? And she's like, no. So I said, okay, I'm one of those people then. And she understood it. She didn't have much to say on the matter, but she understood it for what it was. She accepted it, and yeah.
And friends who are not Muslim?
Some of my friends genuinely thought, I think for a lot of people, especially a male, most male, and I guess for some females as well, when they suddenly see, because it was so solitary and confined, and then suddenly they start seeing that, okay, you're a Muslim, they normally assume it's for a woman or for this or for that, which is kind of irritating at first, but then you start understand for a lot of reverts, there's a general suspicion of them by non-Muslims and Muslims. So you're getting it from both sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned itikaf.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating. You've done that how many times now?
Only once. Essentially, when I was a new Muslim, one of my close friends at the time, their brothers were in itikaf. And that was when I first found out, that you do something like this. There was no spiritual high like it for me. I think the first 2 days was the adjustment period, but then you really start getting in the zone. I think I read the Quran by my second night. After Maghrib, I just started reading Quran and I had finished it by Fajr. The next morning, I was just, the guys were telling me, calm down, like breathe, etc. Understood why you do get a bit burnt out, because you kind of start liking the feeling you have and you really, really enjoy it, but you also got to pace yourself. So
we're going to cross over for an ad break now, and when we return, we'll continue, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum for now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to New Beginnings, coming to you from the Lifestyle Center at Antique Cafe. We're talking to Jared Baker today about his conversion to Islam, and we're going to move on now to a very interesting subject. You would recall that a few episodes ago we interviewed Mulana Muhammad Sandile Tohala, and we spent a lot of time discussing the notion that many people have, that when one converts to Islam, they actually have to change their name. And Mulana Tuala, because he had converted when he was very young, actually forcibly had a name given to him, and he had no idea that he actually could keep his own name. Jared, on the other hand, because he converted at an older age, elected to keep his name. And I just want to talk about that because we've already chatted about it, and it's a fascinating story. So tell me.
I think for me, having already known the bombardment that some reverts get, etc. Again, I know it's from a good place and whatnot. I think the biggest first question that's normally asked after it's known that you're a revert is, what's your name? And you tell them your name, and it's either taken with great offense or great surprise when you just give them your normal name. For me, it was something that was the name my father gave me. That was something I was very proud of. It was something I felt like Jared. End of story. I didn't feel like giving myself any other name. For me, it was something that, although not much, it was something I already started adding a value to, especially towards myself. So essentially, in the early days, it was my constant explaining that I don't have to change my name. And then some people be like, well, yeah, that's true, but you should. And I still didn't. I just kind of say, yeah, sure, whatever, and move on with that and still not change my name. Itikaf and whatnot. Some of the brothers were very, very, very uncomfortable giving me an English name, calling me by an English name. And I told them, if it makes you feel better, call me what you want. So for itikaf, some of the brothers had called me Abdul Rahman after the masjid, etc. And essentially when I said, okay, sure, you can call me what you want, it's more so for your comfort. It has nothing to do with me. It doesn't mean I want the name. It's for your comfort, because I started noticing some people genuinely, like, they malfunction. They cannot reconcile the fact that you're a Muslim with a non-Muslim name. In my opinion, so long as you're a Muslim, then your name becomes Muslim. So essentially, that was the case. But eventually it gets so tiring having to explain yourself constantly and constantly and constantly, or people giving you random names here, there, and everywhere. I think it's very pretentious. And eventually I just said, okay, I'll go with a name that I've heard consistently from people that I genuinely love and care for, and that was Jarir. So when I do introduce myself, some people, normally I weigh up how they're going to take it at first. I'll give them the option, you call me Jared or Jarir, it's your choice. And yeah, that's how I kind of reconcile the conflict nowadays.
Okay, one of the main objectives of the show is to educate people who were born Muslim about some of the issues facing convert Muslims. So in terms of this name issue, which keeps on coming up in various discussions that I've had with people who've converted to Islam, how would you advise a born Muslim to actually engage with a convert Muslim in this regard? What you ask them the name, and they say the name is Michaela or Jared or Brian. What should you do?
I think the name issue is a very culturally based thing. I think it's isolated specifically towards a more insular culture, etc. I don't really have that issue, with actual Arabs, for example, etc. It's nothing to them.
But it's a South African Muslim community.
It's the South African Muslim community. I think the biggest issue is that they need to understand that revats are very fragile in that state, and you must understand, if all you're doing is correcting them, remember, you're creating the impression that they're not doing anything right. The name issue is a big one of those. I think the biggest issue I know there's some people who feel they're very much Muslims, like, I don't want to change my name. That is a fundamental piece of their identity, the same as it is for me. So for that, I think that they need to understand that I was a human being before I was Muslim, that had my own memories, my own experiences, etc. That's what they also need to understand, that we're human beings, A lot of people think, although we are born again, essentially, we're like babies in terms of our faith, need to understand that there was a person before they took the Shahada, and you can't exactly erase them. A lot of people expect this person to start doing a whole lot of things that they themselves would not do, So I think that's the biggest one. I think also some degree of understanding that revats don't necessarily come from the same backgrounds as they do. So a lot of the time you'll find revats being chastised or offenses taken when they experience some degree of a culture clash, etc. So for me, I remember during Itikaf, one of the brothers had called me aside and says, you need to stop speaking the way you do. And I was offended. I grew up in the area I was, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, I had obviously ended up naturally adopting a certain demeanor, etc.
Is this an accent, or was it the
accent, language, etc.? I mean, I when I speak in that specific context, it was a very academic context that I was speaking to a Maulana about, and some of the brothers had taken offense, like, how do you speak like that? You speaking as if you hoity-toity, etc. I tried to explain it. This is how I speak. That was something I did take great offense to class something that I cannot help as offensive to your culture or to you because you're not accustomed to it. I think that was very, very annoying for me. Okay. It's something that still, kind of ticks on my mind, etc., because people still maintain that it's somewhat ostentatious on my side or pretentious to speak the way I do, but that's how I speak.
What are some of the other challenges you face since converting to Islam?
I think, apart from what we've discussed, really, naturally there comes a prejudice. For me, I come from a very mixed ethnicity. When our family is all together, there are blacks, whites, Indians, coloreds, people from all walks of life, people from Tanzania, the works. So it's a very, very odd and mixed family. So for me, although it's not, I don't really pick up too much or judge other people's culture, etc. A lot of people do kind of, you do get comments here and there. And I have experienced in the past, incidents of racism, incidents of colorism, etc. But I think those aren't that isn't Islam. Those are people who just happened to be Muslim. It could have been anybody else as well.
How do you process them so as to not let them put you off Islam?
At first, I guess I developed a slight inferiority complex. I would actually just keep my head down and stay out of view in particular instances. But eventually, as I started getting more confident and I started getting a voice, etc., my voice started being respected by a lot of elders and scholars, etc. That's when I started being much more vocal about the issue and also more militant about it. I would not let it pass anymore. If it happened, if somebody had something to say, I would check them on it. Not fight them, but I'd make sure that I'd check them on it and ask, okay, where are you coming from with that?
Okay. And in terms of marriage, I know you're still young, but do you think that it would ever pose a problem for you being a convert?
Yeah. Definitely, I did want to get married, etc. But the biggest issue was the color of my skin and what people would think, etc., etc. Not so much my character. My character wasn't brought into question. I'll not mention names or anything. Character wasn't brought into question. Nothing bad was brought up about me other than the image I would present. Apparently, it's a bad image to some people. So yeah, I see it as a problem, but at the same time, there's a lot of families which have literally just decided I'm their son. I'm this. So many families. It's actually hard to keep up now, especially during Eid and whatnot, because people are raring to have me with them, etc. And yeah.
So as much as it was a solitary journey in the beginning, it isn't anymore.
It isn't anymore. No, it was very solitary in the beginning. Remember that phase where I was doing all this research alone, etc. I wasn't practicing, etc. But now I'm at a point where I've kind of found my place within the fold of Islam, and I'm happy with it, and I'm growing with it.
Alhamdulillah. We're going to take a short ad break, and when we return, we'll be joined again by Jared for the final segment of the show. See you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to New Beginnings. Jared, before the break, we spoke about some of the challenges that you have faced as a convert, and you spoke about how initially you went through something of an inferiority complex.
Yeah, a brief moment.
I would like you to expand on that, but I want you to basically advise people who have come to Islam as to how to deal with this, because I know that a lot of them go through that. We've spoken about it on the shows, on behind the scenes, and it's something which they all go through. How do you deal with this inferiority complex that's imposed on you from the outside when you become a Muslim?
I think for me, what assisted me was that I wasn't just like a packet in the wind, etc. I still kept myself involved. I'd go for programs, I'd engage in debate, and I was never afraid to ask questions, etc. If I had a pertinent issue, I'd go ask the nearest Malana or Sheikh, etc., etc. So for me, regarding that inferiority complex, I think that those things develop over, specific events or a specific period in time where, it starts getting you start noticing either different treatment of different people, etc., as opposed to you. And for me, the way I dealt with that particularly was to just start implementing a better adab on my end, because when people start seeing that, they immediately kind of take a step back, because you're kind of doing something that generally they aren't doing themselves, etc. So kind of at first it was keep your head down, but then it was be out there, but be the best Muslim you can be, present a good Islamic image, and you won't exactly be a target, etc. But with regards to the prejudices that come, I think being in this country, being specifically with its historical events, etc. I think prejudice comes with the territory. In any event, whether you are Muslim or not, prejudice is there, and you just have to accept it and deal with it, because you know on your end what you are, etc. Whether if somebody wants to judge you based on the color of your skin, or your upbringing, your background, what family you belong to, etc. That's it's a poverty mentality. It's a that arises from previous difficulties historically. It's not that it's right, but I'm not going to be angry with them, etc. So I think other refuts also shouldn't hold themselves back. I know a whole lot of refuts who just kind of, you know what, it's an us and them type situation. I don't think you need to see it that way.
Okay, but Allah says in the Quran that He's created us into nations and tribes so that we may recognize one another, and that the most honorable in His sight is the ones amongst us who are the most conscious of Him. And the Prophet ﷺ had also said that no Arab is superior to non-Arab. So I know what you said. We're living in a country which has a history of apartheid, but one would assume that ideally no Muslim should have a prejudicial attitude towards anybody else. So what would you say to Muslims who do have these attitudes? Because this is, you may have met Arab Muslims and didn't experience that, but we're living in South Africa. This is the reality, and prejudice is rife amongst Muslims. 100%. So what would you say to Muslims?
Listen, I mean, if they aren't listening to what the Quran is telling them, then I mean, all I can say is it's in the Quran. You're not supposed to be be prejudicial towards one another at all, Muslim or not Muslim. No matter what particular creed you are, what tribe you came from, etc., etc. It's just something that you shouldn't do. Good human beings don't do that. So, I mean, to tell them, hey, don't do it, is just a repetition of what they've already been told. They get told that, they know it's wrong. I've had people tell me, listen, I know it's wrong for me to say this, right? But I wouldn't be comfortable with my daughter marrying so-and-so, right? And I know I'm wrong for it, and I'll take the sin for it. That's the type of mentality it is. And I think when you get to that point, there isn't much you can do other than educate the next generation. I think it's getting there. I think as the generation, my generation and going forward, they're becoming a lot less color conscious. They're becoming a lot less prejudicial towards each other. And within my generation, that's where a lot of the conflict is lying because of that, because that generation is now kind of spreading their wings. It's causing conflict in the homes. It's causing, taklif in other people's lives, etc. But I think going forward, as soon as you start sensitizing people that this behavior is not okay, you start sensitizing those children that this is not okay, I think that's where the real big steps start being made. I think for a lot of people, and it's sad, I mean, a good amount of prejudice grows even within our madrasas, in our Islamic schools, etc., where these children come on, they go to university, they're suddenly exposed to the real world, and they turn back and they're like, I don't want to be part of those people, which is sad. That should never have happened. You should never have bred such prejudice in an environment where you're supposed to be perfecting your deen.
Okay, you mentioned the open day at the mosque.
Yeah.
We've spoken about your journey, which was solitary.
Yeah.
But obviously, that's not the journey that all converts walk upon.
Yeah.
In terms of exposing more people to Islam, what, in your view, are effective forms of dawah?
For me, I think at a personal level, my behavior. I think my behavior has always been, I have a lot of non-Muslim friends, and I lived and grew up in a very secular environment. So for me, I think saying I'm doing this because of this, right? When you start educating people, just by the way, the same way I learned in Jamaat, right? People start looking at it and realizing, and they want a piece of it too. So when they see how peaceful you look after you read Salah, or how you've calmed down, etc., or just in general your mental well-being, etc., being in very high spirits, they start wanting a piece of that. So I think an effective form of dawah is, again, our own behavior towards others, whether they're Muslim or not, always being a good person, always presenting a good portrayal of Islam. I think the biggest hindrances to a lot of people who wanted to become Muslim, etc., is the behavior of other Muslims.
So what would you say to people who are not Muslim who are watching the show, if they are put off by the behavior of a Muslim, if they are exposed to articles which are Islamophobic, how should they approach understanding Islam? What should they do?
Well, firstly, I'd say I understand the fear. I do. It's a very real fear to step into, and for a lot of people, they're already ostracized, they're already prejudiced, to step into a fold where that may continue happening even on that level, right? Something where you expect to have found your place and then get told, well, yeah, your place is here, but you're also over there. I think what they need to do, they need to be true to themselves. When they do decide, okay, I am a Muslim, etc., don't please others, right? If you do what you think is right for your deen, by all means take as much advice as possible, but at the same time, don't also appease others. If you know that Islamically you aren't doing anything wrong, etc., it doesn't mean you have to change your name, for example. It doesn't mean you have to change the way you dress or do this, etc. My best advice I could say is take the step, right? Embrace it, and yeah.
Okay, Jared, you work a lot with the youth, and you are quite young yourself. What is your advice to young Muslims who are battling in terms of identity negotiation? On the one hand, they're Muslim, they're supposed to pray 5 times a day, fast in the month of Ramadan, stay away from certain things. And then on the other hand, they're bombarded by Netflix and YouTube, which are giving them different messages and which can arouse the temptation within them. What advice would you give to them? How does a young man or woman, young Muslim man or young Muslim woman negotiate his or her way through this terrain?
I understand difficulty, but the answer is actually, or the remedy is actually quite simple. I think we've reached the point where there's a lot of people saying, I am Muslim, because they were told that and they just do this. It's just a process. There's no amount of belief or actual faith in there. It's just a, how do I explain it? It's like an abacus. You're just racking up the sins and then making it up with prayer and doing this. I need this, so I'm going to pray. I think what needs to happen is, I think for reverts, you must understand, for us to make that jump, to throw away everything we already know, or to isolate it, or to bend it and now become Muslim, right, is a very, very big step. You're now changing an integral part of your becoming Muslim. Again, you're changing a very integral part of your identity and adopting a very integral part of your identity. Islam is a code to live by. There is a way for us to do everything, from general hygiene to the way we eat, to the way we treat others, down to matters of the bedroom. There is always some way, shape, or form that we are instructed to do something. So I think for us, because we've researched this and we've understood it and we've said, okay, this is something I accept, right? We do these things with love. We do these things with purpose. A lot of people need to start doing that. A lot of people who their whole lives have never read an English Quran. They can read Arabic. Some of them are Hafiz, but they don't know what's written in the Quran. So, I mean, it's great. That's very, very good. But at the end of the day, you need to understand what your religion is.
Okay. Jazakallah khairan, Jared, for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. May Allah keep you steadfast and use you to further His deen and to inspire many, many more people, inshallah.
Ameen.
That was Jared Baker joining us today on New Beginnings. Remember to join us again next week for another episode, inshallah. Thank you so much for joining us. And from the Lifestyle Center at Antique Cafe, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.